I think Ben is a pre-recorded presentation by Sandro.
Well, I was just waiting to see if there were someone from NCI in the line. I was in touch with Ben over the last days, and last week he was sick, so we were not able to set up like a telco before and like capture the video about this presentation. So I was just waiting a little bit to see if there were someone else from NCI, but I can understand that it's very, very early in the morning in Canberra now.
What could be done is that later on, maybe if we can still record the presentation, we could share it with the group later on.
Absolutely. We could also include these in the final videos that we'll post on the website. So absolutely, yes. Yeah, I will get in touch with him afterwards and see when we can do that.
Yeah, I agree. And actually going to, okay, so I want to share the agenda with you now just to make sure that we, let me see. Here's my web browser. Yeah, can you see the agenda now?
Yes, is it
very small?
See it, but it's small. Yes.
Yeah, if
small.
you zoom in,
okay.
Yeah, put it.
Okay, so
Sure.
let me see. Let me see. So, I don't know if this is helping. Did this help or?
Yes.
I thought I made it. Okay. Okay, so now we have, I just want to share the agenda to remind people with the, with our presenters and to make sure that, you know, we can, so this is the second session and okay, so any questions for our presenters?
I basically would like to open the floor for the questions, just asking our speakers what would be from their perspective and based on their experience and their also discussions and interaction with the end users, the top one use case that they would like to address, just to better highlight the requirements and the user perspective in this meeting. So I would like just to have like sort of round table with all the speakers and also other people involved in the telco as well, just to mention what they think is from their perspective the most relevant use case they are addressing.
You hear me? It seems like my connection is not working. You hear me?
That's fine. We hear you very well. Yeah.
I would maybe try it first to say I would be curious to know where the application developers would fit into that. We've talked about data providers and end user in the impact communities and so on, and the scientists that produce a model, but at least in the Earth observation community, there is a pretty strong application developer community. So these can be scientists that get their model and science package and distributed into a marketplace. So it was a bit more maybe stimulation from the industry, but I was curious to know if the application marketplace, application developer sense is a good fit also for ESGF.
Tom, can you repeat the question, please? I didn't hear the question fully.
Okay, so do you hear me well now?
Yes.
Okay, so my question was, where does the application developers and application marketplace, does it fit with the ESGF way to do things? Is the application developer a type of user that we want to address?
The application developer, you mean like, for example, our teams who work on the developing the tools for the ESGF?
Not exactly. So as all the user that can use ESGF services and infrastructure, I was referring to application developers. So it can be in private companies that develop application. It can be in the scientific community they develop application. So pieces of software that will be discoverable and usable and shareable. So it's really application developer in a very large sense, not necessarily developer, code developer, but it's more about the application itself.
Well, actually, I see both. So I see users that will come from the scientific community. And if we think, for instance, Climate for Impact portal, this is a perfect example of downstream service that can actually serve the impact community and can leverage actually the compute services that we are developing. So that's a very straightforward example. But I also see the private sector that could be very interested in the services offered by the climate community to build some downstream services. And in that respect, the Copernicus, ESA, and satellite ecosystem will probably be one of the areas where this kind of development more in the private sector could be developed or could raise some very good examples.
Thank you, Sandro. So in your example, I think you made a good point. If your users, the users of your platforms and portals, they can share what they've done as a new product, as a new application. So they can share notebooks. For me, a notebook would become an application, something demonstrable. So there you can make some more value out of the work done by your community of users.
Absolutely. The notebook will be, for instance, in what we do, the notebook about a climate indicator could be some very simple application. But there could be, of course, many others with a higher complexity. You mentioned, for instance, the machine learning part. Kristin mentioned the data visualization part. So there could be application much more complex. But of course, they could leverage some services, some lower level services providing compute capabilities. So yeah, in the scientific world, there could be notebooks, workflows, and code that could be shared very easily. And I see that if we go in the private sector, there could be very appealing applications that could be developed for end users. When I say end users, I also mean like stakeholders that are that could be very, very interested in this kind of services offering.
Thank you, Sandro. I have another comment. So for machine learning, already it was a bit difficult for us to try to say what is an application, what is a process. But then you have a new kind of thing that appear is our trained model, deep learning model, neural networks, and so on. So what do we do with these? Are they a special class of new type of data? Are they processes? What is a trained model for you? Like I could add that I feel like this will be a requirement for some of the users to have access to trained models that will detect or localize or classify whatever just like applications. So, so I think we need to be aware of a new class of artifact of thing that we might have to manage in our projects, and specifically these are trained models.
Yeah, we saw something like this also in the, if I'm not wrong, in NASA presentation about something. I don't know, Tom, do you want to add something on that?
Yeah, I was going to mention that, well, with regards to the previous question, I can see we have essentially two types of users, the outside users who don't have accounts and the inside users who are mostly scientists. I guess you would call them application developers. And most of our clients are scientists at NASA, and those scientists tend to actually have accounts on the analytics cluster so that it would be, they don't have to go through the WPS interface, which is awkward relative to working in a shell environment. As I think, Tom, you mentioned previously, working interactively through WPS is kind of awkward. So working within the shell environment is typically the way the scientists would work, but often we've tried to make resources available to the scientists to train their own models, but what winds up happening typically is that we will train a model for them and then package it up in a way that's convenient for them, and then they will just run the trained model. We haven't had any customers yet outside of our development group that have been willing to take on the complexity of actually training a new model themselves. But I agree that the models that we train and make available as services are sort of a new class of services, but they typically are made available to the scientists who have accounts on the machine, so they can run it through a Python API rather than having to access it through the WPS interface. Is that?
Yes, thank you, Thomas. So I think there are really two classes of major operation. One is for actual training process. You need to, and this is the complex part. Give all your raw data, all the annotation, all the pipeline, and then you press on a button or several buttons, and then you have a new. After several hours, you have a new train model. This is the hard part. But once it's done, to have that train model or series of train model into operations as new processes, this might be the first thing we want to work on. So as far as offering external interfaces, but the whole training, there is a lot of implications to it to open that up to well, even those with a quota, it's can be pretty extensive. But once we have a trained model, once we have a machine learning application, how do we make that as a WPS? I think that is relevant.
So I will take also this back to ag discussion where we have the data characteristics and Sasha about like abstracting some of those concepts into a data model. So a machine learning model could be also one of these data, I guess, data objects that we have to ESGF probably could support and index and get the metadata and make it available to the others. So so they could see how it has been used and who used it and what data has been used and things like this.
Maybe for the research aspect of it, for operation, it's a lot of challenges. But for instance, if you have several models, you have to keep the version and all the parameters and hyperparameters of the models. You have to develop the meta information on this. So that might be, and what's even more difficult is getting all of the data that was used to produce a set model and all the annotation. So this is a big ask, but I need to keep asking it.
Yeah, and to be honest, until now, I see there is. So from all the presentation we have seen, we've seen that there is work being done in terms of like trying to serve at least the basic operations on top of the data. There are multiple steps that we have to do. So there's the using ESGF as a data dissemination tool in order to help us with implementing these operations. But on top of that, there are some complex operations that need support of complex workflows, sophisticated tools like machine learning, kernels, and there is, in my mind, there is still a disconnect between this high level of machine learning tools and the data dissemination that we use. So there is still some work that needs to be done, and it's mostly, I think mostly it's research and understanding how to use those things. We can, on individual basis, and actually find people who have done this, but can you disseminate it to others? Can you reuse it? Those are the big questions that we need to answer.
Yes, Christian here. So I think it's the same as when you think about the downscaling, the statistical downscaling, for example. It's like a machine learning algorithm, meaning that you need to train it, you need to configure it. It's not really straightforward. You need to know exactly what you are doing because you could do really wrong things. So I think it's not the same as just as you said, the basic, more basic calculations like Lambert indices. So I see that as another very different. People would use that. I think it's not, for example, scientific from other domains that could use that necessarily, even if they need it. So I think it's really another category of processing capabilities.
Sure, and going back with what Ag said, if this what we just discussed for machine learning and let's say big data analytics, if we need to test it, if we need to make sure it works, it quote unquote works, how do we evaluate those performances? It's not necessarily just comparing floating points together. Sometimes it's a lot more involved to know what is the performance of what I've just trained. Yeah, it's high precision, whatever, but it's overfitting, and so we need good standard, good way to describe this, and good experiment. A lot of use cases. So if we want to compare and ensure non-regression of subsequent models and so on, it's we need to take care of this.
Yeah, you need good tools to evaluate what is the performance of the configuration for the machine learning or downscaling is the same.
Yeah. So I have actually a question and maybe comment. So one of the things that I also wanted to understand in this discussion is the user requirements, and I've heard actually from others that our users are more comfortable working within a terminal, and we are, in all our efforts, I guess we are trying to build these beautiful tools, like high-level tools, which uses Jupyter Hub and which uses some high-level interfaces to help users. Now, do we, I think I forgot who showed, like there was a feedback cycle where you show the interface to the scientist and you get feedback. And this is very, very good. This is very useful, actually, where we can reiterate and find out exactly if, as computer scientists, what we are doing is of value to the scientist. So, so that's one thing that I probably, it's good to see more. So, and we did a demo also for our scientists with the, what Jason was describing. So, do you feel that we need to do more of these? Do you, would this be something that's really valuable when we do the face-to-face next year, to probably for the groups who are on the call right now, if they can do more of this stuff? and present during the face-to-face.
Yeah, I totally support that. Because actually, today we have seen several presentations on different efforts ongoing, but we have like very important challenge to face, that is to increase the awareness of the users about this kind of tools, that need to increase their understanding on what we want to provide, what are the challenges that we want to address, what are the problems that we want to solve, basically. And we need to increase also the exploitation. So there is a lot challenge in there that is related to the user uptake and the way that we communicate with the end users about the service, what it does, how it can be used, and so on and so forth. So a lot of dissemination, training material, having maybe some common entry point from portals about different solutions or different things that could be used. So we should need to be more pervasive in the community about this kind of efforts in a way that we can really disseminate and explain how to use these services and why the end users could really benefit from them. So I see that besides the development efforts, we should also invest quite a lot collectively in dissemination and training material and stuff like that. So that's, I think, something relevant. And this could be partially done also in physical meetings like the ESGF, as you suggest, Caleb.
Yeah.
One comment maybe on the command line. Of course, many users in the climate research will use only that for data processing or data analytics. But also I've been dealing with users from other scientific domains, for example, hydrologists or agronomists or people working with water management or crops. Many of those don't even know about Linux, so they don't know about command line. So I think there are also different kind of users that have different needs of different interfaces. Most of the people know about Python right now, which was not the case 3-4 years ago, where those other scientific domain researchers were using GIS software and Excel. And now they are moving to Python too, but many on Windows machines still. So they are not comfortable neither with NetCF format or any command line access. So I think we need to also see that there are different categories of users, and those end users are very important too, because it's their only way to analyze climate data is through the services we can provide, because if they don't have that, they cannot process really all the climate data they would need.
Yeah, actually, this raises, maybe the way I understood your comment is that maybe this raises the question of focusing, the importance of focusing on the interfaces to the data itself. So like working very closely with ESGF as a data dissemination tool in order to provide the different ways to get the data out and pre-process it for whatever the needs of the users are, versus some of the high-level applications. So we all want to do the maybe the machine learning and the other stuff, but did we satisfy the user requirements? The basic needs and user requirements from the data pre-processing, which is, to be honest, if you look at any analytics project, they spend most of their time doing these things before they do the machine learning. So again, like it's this question of how far do we move from the basic interfaces for ESGF and for the data pre-processing and data manipulation to the high level that we would love to have for the community.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because basically it's not just like a computing issue, but there is still a lot on data management. And indeed, there is sort of gap in between what ESGF provides in terms of data and the computing capabilities that we are discussing about today. So there is quite a lot in data collection, preparation, pre-processing before end users can actually do that. So that basically looks like providing different views of the ESGF data archive for their needs. And this kind of views could be different depending on the use cases that they have to face. For instance, in our case, just to tell something about the end user experience, if when we started with this kind of activity, the 70% we made a sort of internal survey, and 70% of the feedback we got were about like subsetting functionalities. So this goes back to Hag presentation about having something very simple, robust, and that is used most of the time by the users. And when we move to more like articulated use cases, we basically identified like a couple that were the multimodal analysis from one modeling group and diagnostics from another actually modeling group. They were like the two main, let me say, analytics use cases that they want to face. But still, in both cases, there was like a lot of discussion in the way we'd like to set up their data collection, basically. And that's something that will happen anytime that we want to do like, or we want to face a different use case. So I still see there some work to be done that is not covered either by ESGF as it is now and the computing components that we are discussing about today. So there is a sort of gap in the middle that needs to be covered.
Yes. So Sandro, I'm not sure exactly if you want how to proceed. We went to the discussion, sort of more of a general discussion. Is there any specific questions to the presenters from the second session? The individual presenters, do we have any questions for them, or should we continue with our general discussion?
Well, I will, if there are other questions, I would just keep with the general discussion. And if there are other questions to the speakers or the people attending, and I would just do some more, I would just spend some more time on the questions and then wrap up and close the meeting. So any other questions about use cases or user requirements or comments on what we are today?
Just have one comment going back to Ag's presentation. I think it was a good overview of what we should try to focus and coordinate, because still I think we have many solutions or to address sometimes the same problems. So I think we need to really look at what is being developed and what are the objectives to see how we can coordinate better and not and to be more efficient in the different approach we use to develop those solutions. So I think it's really important to address this aspect.
Then we agree with Ag with no fancy things. That's what I remember from Ag's presentation.
No, for me, the point was more the to have not to develop the same to address the same problems with different tools that we develop in parallel. I think we have seen some convergence, for example, for the WPS with Birdhouse that many are using already. This is one example of more convergence toward the use of the same tool to answer a specific problem. So, of course, there's a need for diversity because sometimes the architecture or the users we want to serve have very specific needs. So I think there will be always some overlap anyway, but maybe not as much as right now. So I think it's a good question to ask, but then we need to see if we continue with all those tools in parallel, or do we need some convergence in some of them, or those questions are always in my mind when we organize the developments.
Great questions, though. Very good questions.
Yeah, and actually, I also have from the presentation I've seen so far, I think there is a need to maybe bring back more of the compute node to be the compute node working team, to probably to share more of these developments and results and try to, I'm not sure how to say that, but maybe converge into sort of an implementation plan, not necessarily, and I know each team, they have their own responsibilities to their sponsors, which, totally understandable, but I think there is a need to unify or at least have an approach that everybody agrees on from all the different teams with the working. And I know, like last year we had sort of the compute working group where we're doing this, and the only advice is maybe to re-energize the team and continue doing the same thing.
Yes, and this could be certainly a topic for the ESGF face-to-face meeting, indeed. We'll discuss also more in that venue.
For example, we have seen a lot of ENES-RI and Dask use in the different presentations. So I think this is an example of some kind of convergence towards some libraries and tools that we use in some part of the backends.
So it can be about building that new software together, but it's also about raising our collective competency levels on those technologies. So through these projects or other projects, but we've identified the exact same stack: ENES-RI, Dask, it comes all the time, and ZAR. So we need to build maybe some training material for ourselves and for other developers, which is a bit different from building the future architecture.
Yes, I agree. And I think even now with all I know that ENES-RI and Dask are coming up over and over again, but for example, if there is a need for more support of machine learning tools, are we adapting the right tools here? And if there is a move to have more of a big data approach where we could use some of the distributed database systems in the cloud, would it make sense to also look at Spark? And I know, I think Tom at NASA, I haven't been at that time. I wasn't part of the group, but I think NASA did some work and looked at this previously. Do we need to revisit? And this is just an example. I'm giving an example. Do we need to revisit some of those tools and make sure that moving forward we're adapting the tool that will give us the most flexibility in the future? So I assume that, silence is sort of like agreement, or hopefully not disagreement.
I think Tom disconnected. I think a few minutes ago I've seen him disconnect from Maxwell.
Oh, he disconnected. Okay.
Yeah, maybe 5 minutes ago.
You're right. But yeah,
I can answer for Spark. For Crim, we had experts working on this for several years, but now they are gone. So it's difficult for us to maintain or expand our expertise on that particular tool. But it's still a good solution. But just to say that this is not the choice we would make right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to go now. Got a taxi waiting, but thank you, everyone. Really appreciate the conversation, and yeah, I think we should keep talking and keep looking at convergence. Sorry. Thank you very much, Sandro.
Okay.
Thank you, Hag.
Thank you. Thanks. So, Sandro, I'll go ahead.
I will go. Bye then.
Okay. Bye. So, Sandro, I'll give it back to you and see what do you think we should do next?
Okay. Well, I think that we are actually approaching the end of the workshop. So I think that it was very great workshop. We had very good attendance. I counted about 25 people for most of the time in the meeting. So even though the timing was not like the best one, I think we had a very good level of attendance. So we heard about a lot of topics today, from downstream services or more technological development. So it was quite comprehensive. Also the comparator side, or EOSC or DOE or NASA, the other developments. So I think it was very, very comprehensive view of what is going on worldwide in our community. So I think it was worthwhile having this kind of workshop, and it was very useful also to get the community closer, to circulate and share a lot of information. So I think it was very good. So just as a follow-up, we'll discuss with the organizers, and we'll evaluate the opportunity to have, for instance, another virtual workshop next year, in 1 year from now, for instance, just to keep talking, and just as a good checkpoint to see the progress and what's going on in the community, what are the new things. So we will see if this is a good option to evaluate. And after the workshop, as you know, we'll prepare like a short report. And so we'll get in touch with all the speakers to produce as outcome of this workshop a document that can be delivered to the community. So the document will be posted on the workshop website as soon as it's ready and it's done. So maybe one thing that could be also worthwhile evaluating is to maybe get in touch with one editor and see if we can also prepare a sort of paper about the state of the art of what is going on in our community. I think that there would be quite a lot of interesting material to report. So maybe this is also something that we'll evaluate as a follow-up, and we'll keep you posted about that too. So I think from my side, it's pretty much all. So I would like to ask Sylvie, Galeb, and Kristin if you want to add something as a wrap-up message.
On my side, no, it was interesting to see the range of different developments. There's clearly something to do and to clarify, I mean, at least exchange, but it's very important that we clarify the different type of usage, because as Christian mentioned, the expertise can be very different according to the type of users. So it's very good to have possibilities for very expert people, like on machine learning, some more intermediate users, even the climate modelers, most of them, they won't use the most extreme technology. And then the people that have not at all used with this kind of tools. So we have a range. I think we need to clarify different solutions according to the range of use. And not try to have one solution, but try to fit some things that are impossible fit all together.
Thank you, Sylvie. Galeb, Kristin, do you want to add anything else?
No, actually, nothing. And I would like just to thank everyone who participated in this, and especially the people who presented, took time and presented.
It's the same for me. I want to thank everyone for their participation and also active participation, because I think it was a very dynamic meeting and workshop.
Yeah, thanks also to all. Completely agree.
Okay, so thanks again to all of you for your attendance and participation, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks very much, Sandro and Christian.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.